I am Cassia Vale, 28 years old, from Florida. The night my family broke me was supposed to be a celebration. My birthday dinner, the one night each year that was supposed to be about love, laughter, and belonging. Instead, it became the moment I realized I was nothing but a punchline to them. We were seated around the long wooden table in my parents' beach house, the same one where I grew up drawing dresses in the sand while my brothers surfed. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread filled the air, mingling with the soft sound of waves crashing beyond the patio. "Cassia," my mother said, pouring wine into her glass. "Did you ever find a real job yet? Or are you still pretending to be a designer?" The laughter that followed wasn't gentle. It was cruel, sharp enough to pierce through bone. I forced a smile. "I have clients, Mom. The boutique—" My father cut me off, shaking his head. "Clients? Sweetheart, selling dresses online to college girls doesn't count as a business. You're almost 30. When are you going to wake up?" I looked around the table, at my father's smug grin, my mother's raised brow, my brother Kyle whispering something to his wife, who stifled a giggle. Even my younger sister Maddie, who used to beg me to make her prom dresses, rolled her eyes. That's when I saw it. A small envelope in front of Kyle. He grinned and slid it toward me. "Here," he said. "Thought you might want to see what real success looks like." Inside was a glossy brochure for his new company, a marketing agency my father had helped him fund. My name was printed under creative consultant. I blinked. "What is this?" Kyle smirked. "Dad said it'd be good to put your name on something respectable. Don't worry, we didn't expect you to do any actual work." The laughter returned, louder this time, echoing in my skull. My throat tightened. "You used my name on your company without asking me?" Dad shrugged. "You should be grateful. It's exposure. Maybe it'll help your little fashion hobby look legitimate." The room tilted. My hands trembled around the envelope. "I'm not your decoration," I said, voice shaking. "You don't get to use me like that," my mother scoffed. "Oh, Cassia, stop being dramatic. You should be thanking your father. He's trying to help you stop embarrassing yourself." Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. I stood up so fast my chair scraped across the tile. "You mock me for chasing my dream, but at least I have one. You built your lives on convenience, not courage." Dad slammed his palm against the table. "Watch your tone. Or what?" I snapped. "You'll tell the world your daughter's a failure? Go ahead, because one day that's going to be the biggest joke of all." Maddie's voice was small, almost pitying. "Cass, maybe they're right. You've been trying this for years. Maybe it's time to get a normal job." Normal. That word tasted like poison. I walked out before the tears came. Outside, the Florida air was thick and humid, the sound of waves mocking the chaos inside me. My car keys jingled in my shaking hand. As I opened the door, I heard my father's voice behind me, loud and deliberate. "She'll come crawling back. She always does." But this time, he was wrong. I drove through the night, past the sleeping houses and palm-lined streets, until I reached my tiny apartment, the one they mocked for being beneath me. I sat in the dark, my hands gripping the steering wheel, breath uneven. I thought about every comment they'd ever made. "You're wasting your degree. No one makes money sewing. You're just playing dress up." But beneath the humiliation, something new stirred, something sharp. Anger, not the kind that burns out quickly, but the kind that simmers, steady and certain. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't prove them wrong by begging for their approval. I'd do it by building something they could never take credit for. The next morning, I woke up early and opened my sketchbook. The pages were worn, corners frayed, but it felt like home. I stared at the blank sheet in front of me and whispered, "You laughed at me. Let's see who's laughing last." I started sketching. Not the safe, soft designs I'd been told would sell, but bold, daring pieces that looked like rebellion stitched into fabric. Each line was a strike of defiance. By the time the sun rose, I had the beginnings of a new collection. I didn't know how I'd fund it, where I'd sell it, or if anyone would even care. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't stop, because this wasn't about dreams anymore. It was about dignity. A few days later, I posted my designs on social media, adding a caption that came straight from my soul. They called it a hobby. I call it my future. It didn't go viral. It didn't even get many likes. But one comment caught my eye. From a local boutique owner named Elena Ruiz. "Your work is fearless." Let's talk. That single message felt like oxygen. For the first time in years, someone saw me not as a disappointment, but as an artist. Over the next few weeks, I met with Elena at her boutique. She believed in my design so deeply that she offered to stock my first pieces. We worked late nights together, sipping coffee between pins and fabrics, her laughter filling the air, a sound that healed parts of me my family had broken. When my first dress sold, I cried. Not because of the money, it was barely enough for groceries, but because someone had chosen me. And for the first time, I realized something. The people who break you don't get to decide if you stay broken. They can mock, dismiss, and erase, but they can't destroy what they never built. That night, as I stood in my small kitchen staring at the one glowing order-confirmed notification on my phone, I whispered, "This is the beginning." The same family that had laughed at me didn't know it yet. But they'd just created the very thing that would one day humble them. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to scream or gloat. My success would speak louder than their mockery ever did, because I was done being their punchline. Now, I was becoming their reckoning. The betrayal at that dinner didn't fade with time. It multiplied. Like a cut that kept reopening every time someone smiled at me with pity. My family's laughter had branded itself into my memory, a scar I carried even when I pretended I was fine. For weeks after that night, I avoided their calls. I told myself I was too busy working with Elena, too focused on my designs to care. But late at night, when the world quieted, their voices returned, echoing in my head like a cruel soundtrack. "You'll come crawling back. Stop embarrassing yourself." Those words weren't just insults. They were shackles, and I was still dragging them behind me. Elena's boutique became my refuge. She believed in me in a way no one ever had. When I doubted myself, she'd glance over her glasses and say, "Cassia, stop asking if you can. You already are." One afternoon, she caught me staring at a half-finished dress. "You're thinking about them again, aren't you?" I sighed. They laughed at me, Elena, my own family, like I was some kind of joke. She handed me a cup of coffee, her expression softening. "Then let your success be the punchline." Those words stuck with me, but I didn't realize how true they'd become. The small humiliations didn't stop just because I left home. My mother started calling once a week, pretending to check in. "How are things, sweetheart?" she'd ask, her tone laced with polite condescension. "Still sewing?" I'd swallow the sting. "Yes, Mom. My collection's growing." She'd sigh. "You know, your sister Maddie just got promoted. Regional manager. You should talk to her. She knows how to build stability." Every call ended with the same half-hearted blessing. "I just want what's best for you." But what she really wanted was control. The first boutique display featuring my designs launched in early spring. It was small, just a few dresses in a corner rack, but to me, it felt like a throne. Elena and I worked late the night before, steaming fabrics, fixing tags, and adjusting lights. When I stepped back and saw the sign above the display, Cassia Vale Designs, my throat tightened. "Looks like a beginning," Elena said with a grin. "It is," I whispered. The next day, a young woman walked in and tried on one of my dresses, a soft lilac piece with hand-stitched lace along the hem. When she looked in the mirror, her eyes filled with tears. "I've never felt beautiful before," she said quietly. I smiled through my own tears. "You always were. The dress just reminded you." That moment reminded me why I started all of this. Not for fame or revenge, but for women who needed to see themselves the way I used to dream of seeing myself. A week later, Maddie showed up at the boutique. I didn't even know she was in town. "Cass," she said, stepping through the door, looking around with exaggerated curiosity. "This is cute." I set down my sketchbook. "What are you doing here?" She smiled, brushing her perfectly curled hair over her shoulder. "Mom wanted me to check in. She worries about you." "Funny," I said flatly. She never worried about me when they were laughing at me. Maddie frowned. "Oh, come on, Cass, it was just teasing." "You take things so personally," I clenched my fists. "They used my name for their company, Maddie. That's not teasing. That's theft." She looked away. "Dad said it was just paperwork." "You're overreacting." That was the problem. To them, my pain had always been overreacting. Before she left, Maddie added, "By the way, Kyle's company is booming. You might want to take a few tips before you waste more time on this passion project." I didn't respond. I just smiled, because one day she'd see exactly what I was building, and it would silence every word she'd ever said. But success wasn't instant. My savings were thinning, and some nights I lay awake wondering if my father was right. Was I just chasing a fantasy? When rent was due and the boutique sales slowed, I almost gave in. I even started filling out job applications online, not because I wanted to, but because fear has a way of whispering, maybe they were right. That night, Elena called me. "You sound tired," she said. "I think I'm done, Elena," I admitted, voice cracking. "Maybe I should just stop," she interrupted. "Cassia, I've seen your designs. You were born for this. The world just hasn't caught up yet." Her words reignited the spark I thought I'd lost. The next morning, I posted a video of my process. Sketching, sewing, creating. No filters, no polish, just truth. I titled it, "They Said I'd Never Make It." Watch me try anyway. I didn't expect anyone to notice. But they did. Thousands did. Comments poured in from women around the world. This made me cry. "Keep going. You're inspiring us." My family says the same thing. "I'm rooting for you." For the first time, strangers became my supporters, and their faith filled the space my family's cruelty left empty. By summer, I had enough orders to hire 2 assistants. My studio expanded, and I stopped flinching every time my phone buzzed. When my father called again, his voice carried that familiar arrogance. "Your mother says you're getting some attention online. That's nice. Maybe you can design something for Maddie's wedding." I laughed softly. "Sure," I said. "If she can afford my rates." He went silent. Then, with a forced chuckle, said, "Still got that attitude, huh?" "No," I replied calmly. "I just have self-respect now." When I hung up, I realized that was the first time I'd ever ended a conversation with him feeling powerful instead of small. That night, I walked along the Florida shoreline, the same beach where I used to dream as a girl. The waves shimmered under the moonlight, the wind tugging at my hair. I whispered to the ocean. They laughed at me here. Now, this is where I'll rise, because I understood something now. Every cruel word, every doubt, every smirk had been fuel. They thought they were breaking me, but all they did was sharpen the edge I'd one day cut my path with, and my path was only just beginning. The first time my name appeared in a local fashion magazine, it should have been a dream come true. My design, a gold silk gown that flowed like molten light, had been featured as part of an emerging talent showcase. It was the kind of moment I used to fantasize about when I stitched by candlelight in my tiny apartment. But instead of pride, what I felt was dread, because I knew my family would see it, and they did. The very next day, my mother called, her voice syrupy with false sweetness. "Oh, Cassia, we saw your little article. How lovely that they're encouraging local artists." "Mom," I said slowly, "it wasn't a charity piece. They reached out to me because my designs sold out at the boutique." "Oh, of course, dear," she said quickly, but I could hear the smirk behind her words. "Still, it's nice to see you having fun. But remember, fashion's a fickle world. Fickle. That was her word for everything she didn't understand. My art, my ambition, my fire. A few days later, I went home to drop off some old boxes I'd kept in storage at my parents' house. I thought I could handle it. I thought I was strong enough not to care. When I walked through the door, laughter spilled from the living room. My father, Kyle, and Maddie were there, gathered around the coffee table, wine glasses in hand. "Speak of the devil," Kyle said, holding up his phone. "We were just reading your article out loud. You're practically famous now." His grin was sharp. My mother giggled. "Your father says we should frame it, Cassia. Right next to Kyle's business award. What do you think?" I stared at them. "I think you've had enough fun at my expense." "Oh, come on," Kyle said, still smiling. "We're just teasing. You really need to lighten up." "Mockery isn't teasing," I said, my voice calm but shaking underneath. "It's cruelty disguised as family." Dad stood up, waving a dismissive hand. "Cassia, enough with the dramatics. You should be grateful we even read about you. You're finally doing something worth talking about." My chest tightened. "Grateful? For your mockery?" He crossed his arms. "For the attention. Without our name, no one would even know who you are." That broke something in me. I set down the box I was holding and met his eyes. "You think your name built me? It's been a weight around my neck my whole life. You mocked me, belittled me, and now you want credit for the fire you tried to snuff out." Kyle rolled his eyes. "Oh, please. You're acting like a victim again." Maddie muttered. "You always make everything about yourself." I took a deep breath and said quietly, "Maybe because you never let me have anything of my own." For a moment, the room went silent. My father's jaw twitched, but he didn't reply. I turned and walked out. Outside, the Florida heat pressed against my skin, but the air felt cleaner out there, free of their poison. That was the last time I stepped into that house. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. The mockery didn't stop, even from afar. Whenever my name popped up in local circles, one of them would find a way to twist it. My brother's wife, Emma, left a public comment under one of my posts. "So proud of Cassia for finally finding a hobby that sticks." It stung more than it should have, but instead of replying, I screenshotted it and printed it. I pinned that picture above my sewing table. Every time I doubted myself, I looked at it and whispered, "This is why I won't quit." Their laughter had become my background noise, but instead of drowning me, it fueled me. Weeks passed, and I poured everything into my next collection. I stopped designing for approval. I designed for revenge. The fabrics became bolder, deep crimsons, metallic blacks, fierce cuts that embodied the confidence I was building. Elena noticed the shift. "These pieces," she said one evening as we worked late, "they feel angry." I paused, pinning a sleeve in place. "They are," I admitted. "But they're also healing," she smiled knowingly. "Good. Anger can be art if you know how to shape it." I did. I shaped it until it looked beautiful. One morning, Elena received an invitation to a fashion showcase in Miami, an opportunity to feature emerging designers on a national stage. She slid the letter across the table to me. "You should apply," she said. "Your name deserves to be seen." My chest tightened. "You really think I'm ready for that?" "I don't think," she said. "I know." I looked down at the letter, the elegant print shimmering in the sunlight. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. That night, I filled out the application, heart racing. But before I hit submit, I paused. I thought of my family, of the laughter, the insults, the stolen credit. Then I clicked send. A few weeks later, I got the email, "Congratulations, Cassia Vale. You've been selected to present your collection at the Miami showcase." I screamed. I cried. I laughed. All at once. It felt unreal. Elena hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "See? You're unstoppable." But beneath the joy, a quiet thought lingered. What will they say now? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The showcase announcement made the local papers again, and my family wasted no time pretending they'd supported me all along. My mother posted the article on Facebook with the caption, "So proud of our talented daughter, Cassia." We always knew she'd make us proud. It went viral among her friends. Hundreds of comments praising her amazing parenting. When I saw it, I didn't cry or rage. I just stared at the screen for a long moment, then whispered, "You want pride?" I'll show you what pride looks like. Because if there's one thing I'd learned, it's that the loudest mockery comes right before the silence that follows your success. That night, I worked until dawn. I sewed through exhaustion, through anger, through every memory that tried to pull me down. By sunrise, my final piece was done, a gown made of black satin that caught the light like armor. On the inside of the hem, hidden in silver thread, I embroidered one word: resilient, because that's what I'd become. And soon, the people who laughed would see that resilience on a stage they could never reach. Success has a strange kind of silence to it. When I finally had everything I dreamed of, designs that sold, a name that was beginning to matter, a life that was mine, I realized how empty the room sounded without the voices I'd spent years trying to win over. The nights in my studio were long and quiet. Sometimes I would sew until my eyes burned, just to avoid thinking about how no one ever called to ask how I was doing anymore. The phone that once rang with family gossip and judgment had gone mute, and though I'd wanted that peace, it stung in ways I hadn't expected. Because even when you free yourself from people who hurt you, a part of you still mourns them. Elena noticed it before I admitted it to myself. "You're quieter these days," she said one evening as she packed up fabric samples. I smiled weakly. "Guess I'm just tired." She gave me that knowing look, the one that saw through every mask I tried to wear. "Tired or lonely?" I exhaled. "Both." She didn't push. She just nodded, then said softly, "It's the price of starting over, Cassia. When you walk away from your past, the road ahead gets quieter, but that's how you know you're headed somewhere new." Her words sat with me long after she left. The days leading up to the Miami showcase were a blur of fittings, fabric, and pressure. I had 2 assistants now, Amber and Lila, both young, bright-eyed, and full of the kind of enthusiasm I used to have before the world taught me to protect my hope. One afternoon, Amber looked up from her sewing machine and said, "Cassia, do you ever get scared? Like, what if this all falls apart?" I paused mid-stitch. "Every day," I said honestly. But then I remember, everything I have now I built from nothing. If it falls apart, I'll just build again. Her eyes softened. "That's kind of amazing," I smiled. "It's survival, but survival comes with a cost." At night, when the city went to sleep, I sat alone in my apartment surrounded by sketches and coffee cups. Sometimes I'd scroll through old photos, birthdays, family trips, dinners, trying to understand how love had turned into ridicule. I saw pictures of Maddie's wedding on social media, my family smiling, toasting, celebrating. I hadn't even been invited. Under one of the photos, the caption read, "Family is everything." I closed the app and set my phone down. Family was everything, until you became the part they didn't want to claim. A few nights later, I dreamt of that dinner again. My mother's voice, my father's laughter, Kyle's smug smile. But in the dream, I didn't walk out. I stayed. I screamed. I told them everything I wanted to say that night, but couldn't. When I woke up, my pillow was damp with tears. For the first time in months, I let myself cry, not out of weakness, but release. Because I realized something. I wasn't crying for them anymore. I was crying for the version of me that kept trying to make them proud, and she deserved to be mourned. Elena surprised me with coffee and muffins the next morning. "You've been carrying too much," she said, plopping the bag on my desk. I laughed. "What gave it away? The dark circles, the caffeine shakes, the fact that you cried while steaming a dress last night." I groaned. "You saw that? Sweetheart," she said with a smirk. "You were humming sad songs to the mannequin." I burst out laughing, the sound startling even me. "Okay, fine. Maybe I need a break," she smiled. "Or maybe you just need to remember why you started. You didn't do all this to prove anything. You did it because it's who you are." Her words settled in my chest like warmth. A few days later, an email arrived that made my heart skip a beat. A major fashion magazine wanted to interview me for a feature called Women Who Create. It wasn't about fame. It was about voice, about finally being heard for what I had to say. not what they'd said about me. During the interview, the journalist, a kind woman named Sarah, asked me, "What was the hardest part of your journey?" I thought for a long time before answering, letting go of the people who made me feel small, and realizing that forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. She looked at me thoughtfully. "Do you think they regret it now?" I smiled sadly. "Maybe, but regret can't rewrite the past. I can only write my own future." After the interview, I went for a walk along the beach, the same shoreline where I used to sketch designs in the sand as a teenager. The wind tugged at my hair, and the ocean roared like it was proud of me. For the first time, I didn't feel lonely. I felt whole. The loneliness of starting over had been the echo of an empty space. But now, that space wasn't empty. It was filling with something new: self-respect, peace, and quiet joy. That night, I sat by the window, sketchbook in hand. I started designing my next collection, one that wasn't born from pain, but from peace. Soft fabrics, flowing lines, colors that whispered instead of screamed. The opposite of armor, the opposite of anger, because I'd fought my battles. I didn't need to wear my war anymore. I titled the collection Serenity. When I finished the final sketch, I turned off the lights and looked around my studio. It was messy, chaotic, alive, just like me. I whispered into the still air, "I'm not alone anymore." And I meant it, because sometimes starting over means losing everything. But if what you lose are the people who couldn't love you for who you are, then maybe it isn't loss at all. It's freedom. The days after the magazine feature felt different. Lighter somehow, but charged too. It was as if life had quietly shifted gears, nudging me toward something bigger than I had dared to imagine. People were beginning to notice my name, not because of the family I came from, but because of the woman I was becoming. Every email notification brought new possibilities: boutique inquiries, collaboration requests, journalists asking for quotes. The same name my family once mocked now shimmered in inbox subject lines like a promise. But even as things began to bloom, I couldn't shake the unease in my chest, the sense that success had invited new eyes. Not all of them kind. Elena and I were finalizing the Miami Showcase collection when she said, "You realize, Cassia, this show isn't just a display. It's a declaration." I looked up from my sketchbook. "A declaration of what?" She smiled. "That you've arrived." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to stand on that runway and feel like I belonged there. But deep down, I feared what would happen when they found out. When my family realized the girl they'd belittled was now being celebrated. That fear, I would soon learn, was justified. The first sign came through a text from my cousin. "Leah, hey Cassia, saw your feature. Aunt Margaret won't stop talking about how she always supported you." Funny how memories change, huh? I stared at the message for a long time before replying. People rewrite history when they realize they're not in control of the story anymore. And that's what it was, wasn't it? Control. They couldn't shape me anymore, so now they wanted to align themselves with my rise. One morning, as I was pinning fabric on a mannequin, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered, "Cassia, darling." My mother's voice was sickly sweet. I froze. "Mom, I've been meaning to call. We're so proud of you. I showed your article to all my friends at the club. They just loved your designs." Her voice carried that same airy tone she used when bragging about Maddie's promotions or Kyle's business deals, but now she was bragging about me. "That's nice," I said, keeping my tone even. "Oh, and listen," she continued. "Your father thinks you should consider joining forces with Kyle's company. You could handle the design side, he'd manage the business. Wouldn't that be perfect?" I almost laughed. "You mean the same company that stole my name for their brand?" She sighed dramatically. "Cassia, don't be petty. We're family. It's time to move past old wounds." Old wounds. The audacity of that phrase made my chest burn. "Those old wounds made me who I am," I said coldly. "And for the record, I don't need Kyle's help. He's the one who should be asking for mine." "Cassia, goodbye, Mom." I hung up before she could say another word. My hands were shaking, but not from anger, from power. For the first time, I wasn't begging for approval. I was setting boundaries. That conversation became a turning point. Something shifted in me that day. I started walking differently, speaking differently, thinking differently. The world wasn't happening to me anymore. I was shaping it. I spent the next few weeks refining every detail of my collection for the Miami show. I wanted every stitch, every silhouette to tell a story. My story. Late one night, as I adjusted the final piece, Elena placed a hand on my shoulder. "Cassia," she said softly, "this collection, it's you. Every thread feels alive." I smiled, eyes brimming. Then I finally did it right. When the showcase day arrived, I felt like I was floating and trembling all at once. Backstage was a whirlwind of models, stylists, lights, and chaos, and somehow I was at the center of it all. Elena squeezed my hand before the show began. "No matter what happens out there, you've already won." The lights dimmed, the music swelled, and the first model stepped onto the runway wearing the crimson gown that had once been just a dream in my sketchbook. Each piece that followed was a fragment of my journey. Resilience stitched into silk, defiance woven through lace. When the final model walked in the black satin gown embroidered with resilient, I felt tears prick my eyes. The crowd rose in applause. Cameras flashed. People shouted my name, and somewhere in the audience, I caught sight of something that made my heart stop. My mother and Maddie sitting in the second row. They were clapping, smiling, pretending they'd always been proud. After the show, reporters flooded backstage. Compliments, questions, flashes, it was a blur. But when I finally turned away from the crowd, my mother was there waiting. "You were wonderful," she said softly. "Truly. I'm so proud of you, Cassia." I stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for sincerity. "You're proud now that everyone else is watching," I said quietly. Her smile faltered. "That's not fair." "It's true." I took a step closer. "You called my dream childish. You let them laugh at me. You told me I'd come crawling back. But look around, Mom. I didn't crawl. I climbed." Her lips parted, but no words came out. Then Maddie appeared beside her, clutching her designer purse like a shield. "We just wanted to support you," she said. I gave a small smile. "Then start by admitting you didn't before." They both fell silent. I turned away, leaving them in that silence, the one filled with the weight of their own regret. That night, when I returned to my hotel room, I stood by the window overlooking the city lights. The applause still echoed in my ears, but the noise that used to fill my mind was gone. For the first time, I felt powerful, not because others finally recognized me, but because I did. I whispered to my reflection, "You did it, Cassia. You turned their cruelty into your crown." And for once I believed it completely. In the days after the Miami showcase, the world seemed to finally see me. My inbox overflowed, my name began to trend in local headlines, and designers I'd idolized for years sent messages of congratulations. It should have felt like peace, but instead, it felt like the hush before thunder, the calm before the storm. Because deep down, I knew people like my family never accepted losing control quietly. 2 weeks after the show, I sat in my studio, sketching ideas for my next collection, when Elena burst through the door waving her phone. "You won't believe this," she said breathlessly. "A department store wants to carry your line, nationwide." I blinked. "What?" She nodded, grinning. "They saw your Miami collection. They want a capsule release, 20 designs exclusive to their flagship stores." My mind raced. "This is huge, Elena. This is everything you've worked for," she finished, smiling. It was. For years, I'd dreamed of something like this. A deal that could transform my name into a brand. But even as the excitement bloomed, that familiar ache stirred inside me, because I knew who would call next. Sure enough, the next day, my phone lit up with my father's name. For a long moment, I stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it ring into silence. But another part of me wanted to hear him, to know what angle he was working this time. I answered. "Cassia," his voice boomed, as confident and patronizing as ever. "Congratulations are in order." "Thank you," I said coolly. I read about your little deal. Impressive. I knew you'd make something of yourself one day. My lips curled into a half smile. Funny. I remember you saying fashion was for dreamers who couldn't handle real work. He chuckled, unbothered. Well, people change their minds when they see results. I could practically hear the smirk. Anyway, he continued, I wanted to talk business. Kyle's company is expanding into lifestyle branding. Interiors, accessories, that sort of thing. You two could collaborate. Family empire, you know? There it was. The pitch. The attempt to drag me back under the family name now that I had something worth taking. I appreciate the offer, I said evenly. But I have my own plans. My name stands just fine on its own. His tone hardened. Don't be foolish, Cassia. You've always been emotional. This is an opportunity, I exhaled slowly. No, Dad, this is independence. And I won't trade it for your approval. He was silent for a beat before saying coldly, Don't forget who you are, Cassia. I finally know who I am, I replied, and hung up. That call was the spark that ignited my next step. For years, I had reacted to their cruelty, cried, raged, tried to prove them wrong. But now I wanted strategy. I wanted control. If they wanted to use my name for their benefit, I'd make sure that name became too powerful for them to touch, so I got to work. Elena and I spent weeks meeting with lawyers, negotiating contracts and securing trademarks. I had learned the hard way that family could steal more than your peace. They could steal your identity. So I trademarked everything, my brand name, my logo, my designs. Every signature of mine was legally protected. When the paperwork was finalized, Elena said, Now no one can use you again. I smiled faintly. No one ever will. But even as I tightened my defenses, something inside me softened. Because for the first time, I wasn't creating out of pain. I was creating from power. The new collection took shape in tones of steel blue and white. Calm, controlled, deliberate. It was called Fortress. Every piece symbolized strength without cruelty, elegance without apology. At night, I'd look around my studio and whisper to myself, You're building a fortress they can't burn down. Still, I couldn't ignore the rumblings I heard from mutual acquaintances. My mother had started telling people that Cassia's success was a family effort. Kyle had been pitching designs suspiciously similar to mine. They were circling, waiting for a way back in. And I was ready for them. 2 weeks before the launch, Elena brought me an envelope with no return address. Inside was a glossy invitation to a charity gala hosted by none other than my family's company. At the bottom, in gold lettering, it read, Honoring Local Entrepreneurs, Special Recognition, Cassia Vale. I stared at it, stunned. This can't be real, Elena's eyes narrowed. It's real. They're using you to boost their image. Anger simmered in my veins. They humiliated me for years, and now they want to parade me as their success story. Then go, she said simply. But on your terms, I blinked. What do you mean? She smiled. If they want a show, give them one they'll never forget. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, holding the black satin gown I had made months earlier, the one embroidered with resilient. It had become my talisman, my reminder of every scar turned into strength. I knew what I had to do. I would go to that gala. I would smile for their cameras, but I wouldn't be the girl they mocked. I would be the woman who no longer needed their validation or their permission. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was reclamation. The night of the gala, the lights of downtown Miami shimmered like stars reflected in glass towers. I stepped out of the car in that same black gown, cameras flashing, reporters shouting my name. When I entered the hall, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the false warmth, it all felt familiar. But this time, I wasn't shaking. I found my family near the front table. My mother's smile froze when she saw me. My father straightened his tie, and Maddie's hand clenched her champagne flute. Cassia, my father said too loudly. We're so glad you came, I smiled. Wouldn't miss it. As I took my seat, I realized something. This wasn't their stage anymore. It was mine. That night, as speeches began and false praise filled the air, I waited. The program listed my name under special recognition. They had planned to present me as the success story of the family legacy, but what they didn't know was that I had already called the event coordinator and rewritten my introduction. When my name was announced, the screen behind the stage didn't flash my family's company logo. It flashed mine, and below it, in bold letters, the words, Independent Designer, Founder of Vale Atelier. No affiliations. Gasps rippled through the room. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's face went pale. And I smiled, because the storm had finally arrived, and I was the one who brought the thunder. The applause in the ballroom began hesitantly, scattered, unsure, like a ripple that didn't quite know where to go. My name gleamed across the giant screen behind me, Cassia Vale, founder of Vale Atelier. The words no affiliations pulsed in gold beneath it, each flicker slicing through the heavy silence that had fallen over the room. Every face turned toward me. Some smiled, some whispered, but my family, they just stared, caught in the glare of the truth they'd tried to bury. For years, they'd laughed at me, silenced me, dismissed me. Tonight, I had taken back my voice and given them nowhere to hide. My father's expression was the first to crack. His jaw clenched, that practiced businessman's smile faltering. My mother shifted in her seat, whispering furiously to Maddie, who looked like she wanted to disappear into her wine glass. I walked up to the stage, slow and steady, the hem of my black gown trailing behind me like smoke. The host handed me the microphone, her smile too nervous to be genuine. Cassia, she said, we're honored to recognize your incredible achievements. I took the mic from her gently. Thank you, I said, my voice even. But if I may, I'd like to speak for myself, the crowd murmured. My gaze swept across the room, settling briefly on my parents before returning to the sea of strangers. When I started designing, I began, I was told it was a waste of time, that my dreams were childish, that I'd never amount to anything without the family name. A hush fell over the ballroom. I continued, each word deliberate. But I learned something important. Sometimes the people closest to you are the first to try to make you small, because they can't stand to see you grow beyond their shadow. Someone in the audience clapped quietly. Then another, and another, until the room erupted in applause. Not the polite kind, but the thunderous, defiant kind that fills your chest like oxygen. I glanced back at my family. My father looked like he'd swallowed poison. My mother sat frozen, her smile gone stiff. I finished my speech with a steady breath. To anyone out there who's been told they'll never make it, you don't owe your doubters an explanation. You owe yourself a chance. That's all. I stepped off the stage to the sound of my own name echoing through the hall, and it felt right. For the first time, the applause wasn't for who I came from. It was for who I became. After the event, reporters swarmed me, their questions overlapping. What inspired your independence? Did your family influence your work? Will you be collaborating with them again? I smiled. Inspiration comes from struggle. And no, I work best on my own terms. A photographer captured that moment. The flash catching the glint in my eyes as if even the camera understood what had just happened. When I turned away from the crowd, Elena was waiting by the exit, arms crossed, a knowing smile on her face. You really did it, she said softly. I exhaled, my pulse still racing. It feels unreal, she shook her head. No, Cassia, it feels earned. Later that night, I returned to my hotel room. The city lights glimmered beyond the glass, 1,000 reflections of everything I'd built. I slipped off my heels, my feet aching, and let the silence settle around me. Then, knock, knock. I froze. Another knock, firmer this time. I walked to the door, half expecting room service, but when I opened it, my father stood there. Cassia, he said, voice low. I crossed my arms. I'm surprised you made it up here without security throwing you out. He didn't flinch. We need to talk. I stepped aside wordlessly. He entered, looking more human than I'd seen him in years. His suit slightly wrinkled, his confidence dimmed. I didn't know you were going to do that, he said. I arched an eyebrow, That's the point, he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You embarrassed us tonight. I laughed once, sharp and hollow. Embarrassed you? No, Dad, I told the truth. The fact that it embarrassed you says everything. He looked at me for a long time, the facade slipping. You think this makes you powerful? You're still my daughter. This family built everything you stand on. I stepped closer. No, you built the walls that kept me down. I built the foundation that lifted me up. For the first time, I saw it, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The realization that I no longer needed his name, his approval, or his money. He turned toward the door, his voice heavy. You'll regret this, Cassia. Maybe, I said, but at least the regret will be mine. The door closed behind him, and I sank onto the edge of the bed. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from adrenaline. The strike had landed. It wasn't about humiliating them. It was about freeing myself from the grip they'd had over me my entire life. I hadn't just spoken my truth. I'd shattered the illusion they'd built around me. The next morning, headlines exploded. Designer Cassia Vale shakes up gala, with powerful speech on independence. From mockery to mastery, Cassia Vale's family. Drama goes public. Cassia Vale's words. Ignite a movement for self-made creators. My phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from other designers. Women thanking me. People sharing their own stories of being underestimated. And amid it all, one message stood out: we should talk. Maddie, I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, no need. The message was loud and clear, and I hit send. That afternoon, Elena burst into my office with a grin. The department store doubled their offer after last night. They said your speech gave them goosebumps. I blinked. You're serious? Dead serious. You're not just a designer anymore, Cassia. You're a brand. I laughed, shaking my head in disbelief. Guess speaking the truth really does pay. She raised an eyebrow. You think that was the strike? I looked out the window, a slow smile forming. No, I said. That was the first wave. That night, as the city buzzed below, I drafted a press release announcing Vale Atelier's expansion, an independent initiative supporting young female designers with mentorship and funding. A movement born from everything I'd endured. If my family wanted to own my story, I would make sure the world heard the real one, the version where I rose, and they faded into the background, because the most powerful revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. And I was just getting started. By the next morning, I woke up to find my face splashed across every major fashion headline in the country. My phone buzzed relentlessly. Journalists, brand reps, strangers all reaching out to congratulate me. I had gone viral, but for once it wasn't for the family name. It was for me. The clip from my speech had spread like wildfire. The moment I called out those closest to you who make you small, it resonated. People clipped, shared, quoted it, tagged me in stories with captions like, "She said what we've all been afraid to say." For the first time in my life, the world was listening, not to my family's version of me, but to mine. That day, I arrived at my studio, and the team greeted me with applause. Elena hugged me so tight I almost lost my breath. "Cassia," she said, "you started a movement last night. You have no idea." I looked around, the designers, interns, assistants, all staring at me with pride. It wasn't the fame that hit me then. It was the validation that I'd spent years chasing in all the wrong places. But as I smiled at them, Elena's expression shifted slightly. "You might want to sit down," she said quietly. "There's more." She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. There it was. An official statement from my family's company, posted to social media just an hour earlier. "We are proud to celebrate our daughter, Cassia Vale, whose talent has been nurtured by our family's long-standing legacy of creativity and business excellence. The Vale family stands united behind her success." I read it twice, my blood boiling with each word. They weren't apologizing. They were claiming me, again. I exhaled sharply. They're trying to spin it, to make it look like I'm their product. Elena nodded grimly. "They're scared. You went public, and now they're scrambling to stay relevant. I stared at the screen, my anger sharp and clean. Then it's time for me to make sure the truth is impossible to twist. By afternoon, I scheduled a live interview with Harper and Heartline, the biggest fashion news platform in the region. They'd been begging for an exclusive since the gala, and I decided now was the time. The studio lights were bright. The makeup artists brushed soft against my skin, but beneath the calm exterior I could feel the fire building. The host, a poised woman named Alina, smiled as the cameras rolled. "Cassia, your speech last night has become a cultural moment. How does it feel to have your words ignite such conversation?" I smiled lightly. "It feels overdue. People are tired of pretending that success only counts when it's approved by others, especially when those others never believed in you to begin with." The audience in the studio nodded. Alina leaned forward. "Your family released a statement earlier, praising your success as part of their legacy. Would you like to respond?" There it was, the question everyone wanted answered. I looked straight into the camera. "I owe my success to hard work, failure, and the people who lifted me when others tried to crush me. But I can't credit a legacy built on doubt and dismissal. My path is mine alone." The silence that followed was electric. You could almost hear the weight of it. Truth unfiltered, unapologetic. After the show, the clip went viral within hours. My followers tripled. My inbox exploded with messages from women saying thank you. But the best part? That night, my family's PR team deleted their post. A few days later, I attended a charity event for emerging designers, one I had been invited to long before the gala chaos. The event hall shimmered with string lights and soft jazz, but the atmosphere shifted when I walked in. Heads turned, whispers followed. "Is that Cassia Vale? She's even more beautiful in person. She's the one who called out her own family." I smiled politely, pretending not to hear, but deep down, I felt something strange. Not shame, not fear. Power. Halfway through the night, a familiar voice stopped me. "Cassia." I turned. My mother stood a few feet away, dressed impeccably as always, her pearls glinting under the lights. "Mom," I said flatly. She gave a tight smile. "You've made quite the name for yourself." "I suppose I have." "I won't pretend we didn't make mistakes," she began, her tone careful. "But did you have to humiliate us publicly? Couldn't you have kept this within the family?" I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Within the family? You mean the same family that mocked me, ignored me, and only remembered I existed when I became useful?" Her face tightened. "You're being cruel." "No," I said quietly. "I'm being honest." "There's a difference," she swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "Cassia, we just want to move forward." I shook my head. "You want forgiveness without accountability. That's not how it works." I turned and walked away, leaving her frozen in the middle of the hall, surrounded by people who had heard every word. The next morning, photos of the confrontation were everywhere. Cassia Vale and her mother intense exchange at charity gala. The headlines were brutal, but the public reaction surprised me. Comment after comment read, "She's right. Some families only show up when you shine." Cassia just said what so many of us feel but never dare to say. The tide had turned completely. I wasn't just a designer anymore. I was a symbol, and that terrified my family. A week later, I received an official letter from their lawyer, a thinly veiled threat demanding that I cease public defamation of the Vale family. I called Elena immediately. "They're trying to scare you," she said. "Don't respond. We'll handle it legally if they push." I stared at the letter in disbelief. They still don't get it, do they? They can't silence me anymore. I tore the letter in half and dropped it in the trash. That act, simple, final, felt like the closing of a chapter I'd been trapped in my whole life. That weekend, I hosted the first workshop under Vale Atelier's Empower initiative. 100 young women filled the studio, their eyes bright with hope and fear. The same mix that once lived in mine. I told them my story, not to brag, but to remind them that survival was possible, even after being broken down. "Your worth isn't determined by who doubts you," I said, pacing the small stage. It's defined by what you do when they do. The applause was warm and real, the kind that wraps around you instead of echoing above you. As I looked out at their faces, I realized that revenge was never about destruction. It was about transformation. And in transforming myself, I had become something my family could never control, a force that inspired others to break free. 2. That night I went home, poured a glass of wine, and stood on my balcony overlooking the glittering Miami skyline. The air smelled of salt and possibility. For the first time in years, I felt free. The reckoning wasn't about punishing them anymore. It was about reclaiming myself and showing the world that the girl they once mocked had become the woman they could never silence. And I smiled, whispering into the night, "This is my peace." The morning after my workshop, I woke up to the sound of notifications chiming one after another. My story had been shared again, this time by a national talk show host who called me the voice of self-made women everywhere. For years, I had imagined what success would look like: wealth, recognition, power. But standing there in my kitchen, barefoot, holding a mug of coffee while reading messages from women who said my journey had given them courage, that was what it really meant to make it. The revenge had already happened, quietly, completely, without me having to lift another finger. Still, old habits die hard. I found myself scrolling through my family's social media, half expecting another petty statement or smear attempt, but there was nothing. Silence. My parents' profiles had gone private. Maddie's post had stopped altogether. It was as if they'd been wiped off the grid. And maybe that was their new punishment, to fade away while I finally lived. That week, Elena insisted we take a break. "You've been running on adrenaline for months," she said. "You need to breathe, Cassia." She was right. We booked a small cabin by the coast, 2 days of stillness, waves, and nothing to prove. I packed my sketchbook, not because I planned to work, but because drawing had always been how I thought best. The cabin smelled like cedar and salt water. The ocean stretched endlessly, as blue and quiet as I'd ever seen it. For the first time in years, I slept without dreams clawing at me. On the second morning, I sat on the porch with my coffee, sketching the horizon. The waves reminded me of everything I'd endured, relentless, but cleansing. Elena came out, yawning. "You look peaceful," she said. "I think I am," I replied. "It's strange. I used to think peace meant being forgiven by them. Now I realize it's just letting go." She smiled softly. "You don't need to carry their guilt anymore." "I know," I said, watching the gulls trace circles above the water. I think part of me still wanted them to admit what they did. But maybe silence is its own confession. That evening, I opened my laptop, intending to catch up on emails. Instead, I found a message waiting, from Maddie. My finger hovered over the delete button, but something stopped me. Against my better judgment, I clicked. "Cassia, I know you don't owe me anything. I watched your interviews. I read everything. You were right. I was jealous, and I let them poison me against you, but I've been trying to fix my own life. I hope one day you can forgive me. You didn't deserve what we did." I stared at the words, a lump forming in my throat. Forgiveness. That word had felt foreign for so long, like something I couldn't afford to give without losing myself again. Elena must have seen my expression because she asked quietly, "Who's it from?" "Maddie, and," she apologized. Elena leaned on the railing. "Are you going to reply?" I hesitated. "I don't know. Part of me wants to let her know I've moved on, but another part just wants to move on without reopening it." She nodded. "Then maybe silence is your answer." I smiled faintly. "Yeah, maybe it is." Back in Miami, work resumed like a storm breaking. The Vail Atelier Empower initiative had taken off faster than expected. We received hundreds of applications from aspiring designers, women from all backgrounds, each one burning with potential that the world had overlooked. During the orientation day, I stood before them in a sunlit studio filled with fabric swatches, sewing machines, and nervous excitement. "Welcome," I said. I built this program for people who were told their dreams were too unrealistic. You're proof that they were wrong, they clapped, some wiping away tears. And for a brief, grounding moment, I saw my younger self among them, scared, unseen, but still daring to believe. In the following weeks, magazines called, TV producers reached out, and fashion houses offered collaborations. But this time I chose carefully. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I was curating alignment. One evening, as we closed up the studio, Elena said, "You've changed, Cassia. You're not designing for approval anymore. You're designing from freedom." I smiled. Maybe revenge taught me what self-love couldn't. She tilted her head. "Would you ever tell your family that?" I thought about it. No, they'd never understand. And I don't need them to. Months passed. The seasons shifted. One morning, as I walked through a department store that now featured my line, I saw something that stopped me cold. There, at the display window, hung a massive banner, Vale Atelier, founded by Cassia Vale. My name, my story, my dream. I stood there, watching strangers admire the clothes, hearing one woman tell her daughter, "This designer started with nothing. Look at her now." Tears stung my eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from something deeper. Pride, closure, peace. I realized then that the little girl who once begged for her family's approval didn't exist anymore. She'd grown into the woman she needed all along. That night, I recorded a video for my social media, not about fashion, but about life. "People ask me what revenge feels like," I said, the camera catching the softness in my voice. And I think the truth is, revenge isn't about making others suffer. It's about refusing to let their cruelty define you. It's when your peace becomes louder than their pain. The post went viral overnight. Thousands commented, calling it the closure speech. But for me, it wasn't a performance. It was a farewell. A week later, I visited my parents' old house, not to confront, not to seek, but to end the chapter properly. The gate was rusted, the garden unkempt, the house quieter than I remembered. No one came out when I knocked. I didn't expect them to. I simply left an envelope by the door. Inside was a note that said, "I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean return. I wish you peace, the kind I had to build from nothing." And that was it. I walked away, feeling lighter than I ever had before. That night, sitting in my apartment surrounded by sketches and success, I whispered a quiet thank you. Not to them, but to myself, for enduring, for fighting, for turning pain into power. And I realized something beautiful. I wasn't living to prove them wrong anymore. I was living to prove myself right. The morning light poured through my apartment windows like liquid gold, warm and soft against the sketchbooks scattered across my desk. The city was waking up, traffic humming faintly below, but inside everything was still. Peace had finally found me, not as a gift, but as something I had earned through every sleepless night, every scar, every quiet act of defiance. I sat at my work table with my coffee, flipping through old sketches. There were pages from my early days, designs drawn in shaky pencil lines, dreams that felt too big for the tiny space I once worked in. And yet, here they were, real, alive, tangible. I traced one of the faded sketches with my finger, a simple dress I'd drawn in college, one my mother had laughed at. "No one will ever wear that," she'd said. But now, that same design, refined and reborn, had sold out in boutiques across the country. A soft laugh escaped my lips. "Guess someone did," I whispered to the ghost of that moment. My phone buzzed, a reminder from my assistant. Today wasn't about meetings or press interviews. It was the official launch of the Vale Foundation for Creative Independence, the next evolution of my brand. This wasn't just about fashion anymore. It was about giving others what I had once needed most: belief, space, and a voice. I slipped into a cream suit, minimal and sharp, then headed to the downtown venue. The foundation's logo, a simple V blooming into an open petal, glowed above the entrance. Reporters clustered near the doors, cameras ready, their voices rising as I approached. "Cassia, over here!" How does it feel to go from outsider to icon? Any final thoughts for your family tonight? I paused before the microphones, offering the faintest smile. It feels like freedom, I said simply, then walked inside. The event hall was filled with faces, designers, young artists, mentors, supporters. The air buzzed with anticipation. Elena stood by the stage, beaming. When it was time, I stepped to the podium. My hands didn't tremble. My voice was calm, grounded, full. When I started this journey, I began. I thought revenge would feel like victory, that proving people wrong would heal the wounds they left. But I learned something far more powerful. I looked around the room, letting my words settle. Revenge is loud, but peace is quiet, and it's stronger. The audience leaned in, silent. I built this foundation for anyone who's ever been told they're not enough, for every voice that's been silenced, because I believe the greatest success isn't rising above others. It's rising beyond the limits they set for you. A ripple of applause filled the hall. I smiled, but it wasn't pride this time. It was gratitude. After the ceremony, I stepped outside for air. The city skyline glimmered against the setting sun, skyscrapers blushing pink and gold. Elena joined me, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. To peace, she said, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers. To peace, I echoed, and to never needing permission again. She grinned. You know, your story's going to be taught one day. The designer who turned pain into an empire. I laughed softly. Let them tell it. Just make sure they remember it wasn't revenge that built it. It was resilience. Later that night, I went home to find a small package waiting by my door. There was no name, just my address written in careful handwriting. Inside was a framed photo, one I hadn't seen in years. It was from my teenage years, back when I'd first shown an interest in fashion. I was holding a handmade dress, grinning from ear to ear. Behind me, blurred in the background, were my family, unimpressed, distracted, oblivious. On the back of the photo, a note in familiar cursive read, I found this in Dad's study. Thought you should have it. He keeps your articles in a folder now. And for a long time, I just stood there holding it. No tears came, no bitterness, just understanding. Maybe they would never say the words out loud. Maybe they would never apologize the way I once dreamed they would. But that wasn't my burden anymore. I didn't need their remorse to validate my peace. I placed the photo on my shelf, not as a reminder of pain, but as a symbol of distance traveled. A week later, I sat by the ocean again, the waves slow and calm, tracing the horizon with lazy hands. I had come full circle, back to the silence that once terrified me. Now transformed into something sacred, I took out my journal, the same one I'd started the day I left home. I flipped through the pages, the anger, the grief, the moments of triumph, until I reached the last blank sheet. I wrote slowly. Peace doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without pain. Power doesn't mean control. It means self-trust. And love, real love, begins when you stop begging for it. I closed the book and smiled. That evening, I uploaded one final video for my followers. Not a speech this time, but a reflection. The screen faded from black to the soft glow of my studio, fabrics draped in the background. I looked straight into the lens. For everyone who's ever been told they can't, I hope my story reminds you that you can. You don't owe anyone your silence, your potential, or your peace. You owe yourself the life you've imagined. I paused, then added, and if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. I smiled softly. Because sometimes the family we create is stronger than the one we're born into. Then, after a beat, I asked, what would you do if you stopped letting others define your worth? The video ended on that question, an open door to every heart that needed it. That night, I sat by my window, the moonlight spilling across my desk, sketching my next design. The first line was smooth, confident, the way I felt now. This one wasn't about pain. It was about grace, about starting anew. And as the pencil moved across the page, I realized something with absolute clarity. I wasn't drawing dresses anymore. I was drawing freedom.